What the Truck. My name is Malcolm Harris. It is November 3rd, Monday here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I could not be happier. Y'all, today we have a jam-packed lineup, and this is going to be absolutely outstanding. And Mondays, we're switching it up a little bit because last Monday was one of one. My man, the one and only Craig Fuller, he came on this show. You guys, if I need some information, if I need to know what's up, I'm going to go to the source and the source only. Craig Fuller is here with me in the building. Craig, what is up, man?
Man, it is so much going on. Last week was probably the busiest news week in trucking history. It's amazing. I mean, it was started off last Monday. I was here on What the Truck talking about how the ATA should be held account for their you talk about the driver shortage, the fact that we have this perpetual driver shortage, and that narrative has been playing out.
Definitely.
And there is no perpetual driver shortage. That's the problem. And it's interesting because at their management conference, both Bob Costello, their chief economist, as well as Chris Spear, the chairman of the ATA, came out, and it's basically shift the conversation from being a perpetual driver shortage to a shortage of qualified drivers, which you had Oida on Friday, I think.
Yeah, Louis Pugh.
And he admitted that he's been saying it. We've all been saying that
for
in the industry. It's not the number of CDLs that matters. It's the number of qualified CDLs. And when you lower the standards and you get a flood of truck drivers that are willing to come into our industry, you're going to end up with a problem. And we've had two major problems. One is we have a safety and compliance issue.
Yep.
And the second is that we have an economic problem that's been really destroying the profitability of a lot of motor carriers. So what's really interesting about this is,
talk to me.
Over the last week, I've had 4 mega carrier executives, C-suite and above, or C-suite executives, that have reached out thanking me for bringing attention to the fact that there is no driver shortage and that the problems in our industry are basically perpetuated. Some of them are ATA members, by the way. Many of them are perpetuated by this narrative that we need to lower the barriers to entry for truck drivers to enter our industry, and that's what's causing all these problems. And I think we're now going to have an opportunity to have an honest conversation with the public about the fact that we need to fire bad truck drivers. We need to fire drivers that are non-compliant. We need to fire drivers that don't adhere to the rules. And one of the real sad stories was there was an executive who was not a part of the top 10, but certainly a mega fleet carrier, as we would define it, a couple, maybe 1,000 trucks or above, said the problem is that he's following the only thing that they've done wrong, they're not making money and they're struggling. The only thing they've done wrong is they've been following the rules. And the problem is these guys that don't follow the rules, that don't care about the rules, I've been able to operate charging less than what the carriers that do operate by the rules, and they've been able to be profitable because they don't have to adhere by the rules. Yeah. And this all comes back to utilization. Ultimately, the way a trucking company makes money is putting dollars on their trucks per day, the amount of miles they run per day. And when you're willing to run twice as many miles because you don't care about the hours of service rules, then you're able to put twice as many miles on your truck. Therefore, you can charge a lot less than the carriers that do. And I think that's a problem.
The biggest week in trucking. Listen, we are going to get...
The biggest, certainly from a regulatory standpoint.
100%, 100%. We're going to get into all this, and because I have several questions for you, but before we get into it, I just want to say this month is going to be sponsored by a new sponsor, the good folks at PCS. Guys, give me that clip from PCS, please. Okay. In this freight market, margins are everything. PCS TMS with Cortex AI helps carriers capture the right loads, cut wasted miles, as well as find profit points on every run, because profit, not volume, is the new payload. See how at PCSsoft.com. So, Craig, I want you to talk to me specifically because the ATA now says this issue isn't a shortage, but a lack of qualified drivers. You were on the show last week and you said that, all right, hey, this is BS. This is just rebranding.
Well, not what they said. Not the first thing, not what they came out and said. They're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's the story that we need more drivers and that there's a shortage of CDLs. That was a lie. 100%. That was an untruth. The new version of their story, which I think is really them backpedaling, and I agree with everything they're saying, is that we have a problem of people who aren't qualified to drive in the industry. Yeah. No one's going to dispute that. Everyone in trucking knows that.
For sure.
There's no dispute there.
For sure. Now, the question I have is, turnover, working conditions, these are so-called the real culprits. But like, why do you think that this is still really a story? Why are we still leaning on this? Like,
because the ATA and member carriers have been out telling that story to Congress. And here's the problem. When over the last decade, we've seen a number of rules that have come from Congress that have tried to change the barriers to entry, lower the barriers to entry for truck drivers to come into it. Right. So one of those is the basically entry-level driver training program, which basically did away with driving schools. It said it wasn't required to go through a set curriculum, that anybody could certify anyone to come into our industry. And this created the proliferation of CDL mills, which now Sean Duffy is out attacking, rightfully so. CDL mills, I mean, it's ridiculous that anyone could go take a YouTube test or go work for their employer and basically show up in a truck and learn how to drive a truck over an hour and then pass the CDL test. They've never proven if they can drive a truck through a winter storm or through a mountain overpass or through high winds. Imagine a truck driver that takes a test sitting in Southern California and then trying to get through going between Lake Tahoe or Reno and San Francisco. Is you're talking about one of the most treacherous highways in the country. Or driving down not too far from us off Mont Eagle. Anyone who's driven off I-24 from Nashville to Chattanooga knows just how dangerous that road is. And that driver's never shown any proficiency to do it. Driving in winter weather. And like, these are so many things that the larger carriers that invest in driver training or that the driving training schools are supposed to do. It's ridiculous that we eliminated that requirement that people don't have to go through a driving training program. Now, that's not to suggest that every self-certification or school that's owned by carriers is bad. But what you've done is by eliminating the barriers to those drivers that are willing to break the rules anyways don't really care about the quality of the training. And so now we have unsafe drivers out driving our roads, and we have no way to know. If you're driving down the highway and you see an 18-wheeler beside you, you don't know whether that driver has any training or not.
You have no idea.
And that's the problem. This is 80,000 pounds driving down the highway at 65 or 75, or in some cases, at 90 miles per hour. Because, they don't respect the rules. And then, so this is the problem, is we've lowered the barriers to entry. The second thing that I think is a problem, so we've had the proliferation of CDL mills, and I would argue that may be one of the most damning things that we did. The second is that, and so Congress, when they changed the rules on training, was all about the driver shortage. It's going to help solve the driver shortage. The second thing that they did was that this non-domiciled CDL issue. In 2017, the non-domiciled CDLs were intended for people that live in one state to have the ability to get a CDL in another. That makes sense. If I live in Wisconsin and I'm from Wisconsin and I end up living in Tennessee, then I should be able to go to my CDL and because I'm driving across the country.
It's like a real estate license in different states.
Yeah, it's fine. That I didn't have a problem with. But what happened in 2019, again, to solve the truck driver shortage, was that the FMCSA came out and said that immigrants people that have work permits should be allowed to have a CDL. Now, here's the crazy part about it.
What's that?
A lot of states didn't actually verify that the person had the work permits. And in many cases, as we've heard, a lot of this anecdotal, but also through the investigation, is that a lot of those CDLs were issued fraudulently, and the DOT now knows it. And the problem is that we've eliminated the barriers to entry by basically saying, hey, we have this driver shortage, and that's the more pertinent problem. Then you end up getting a lot of low-quality truck drivers that are not experienced, that don't have the knowledge of the rules. Some of them can't read the language. And that's a problem when you're reading things like signs.
I agree.
There was a great video that's been popping up on social media of this truck driver who's Asian and couldn't speak English and couldn't even translate what a sign, when he was asked specifically by the Highway Patrol to actually talk about a sign. I felt a lot of empathy for the driver. Not because I necessarily am endorsing the fact that you have someone who can't speak English, but this guy was trying and struggling to speak a language, but he had no business being in a truck.
Yes.
And I think that's a travesty, this is a safety issue. And so, but this all goes back to lowering the barriers to entry. And what's happened is we've lowered the barriers to entry so much that we've created an environment where anyone can become a truck driver as long as they were willing to drive a truck. And you know who ends up paying for this is the American public, because it's a safety problem.
It is.
And then our industry ends up paying for it because now you have drivers that are unsafe driving our roads that end up giving a bad rep for everybody. And here's the insanity of it all.
Talk to me.
Is the mega fleets, some of them that actually perpetuated this truck driver shortage problem, end up creating such a narrative around the safety issue because these accidents are pretty horrific. They're the ones that are going to end up paying it for it in the courtrooms, not because they didn't do anything. They perhaps were the ones that maintained compliance. They're the ones that did the right things, but because they're the ones that have all the money. When you give these emotions and these stories out to a jury and they hear about it, they're going to go after the bigger companies. It's the guys that cheat that end up they don't pay the crime. There was a story, remember the guy in Ontario, California, that didn't even use brakes and plowed in and killed a couple of people. There's a story trending on social media where that particular driver or that particular company shut down as the company under one name and opened up the next week the same set of drivers and same set of trucks.
Another type of name.
With not missing a beat. And this is a travesty. I like, as someone who comes from trucking, I'm arguably big trucking, Craig. That's where I came from. That's going to be a clip, by the way. Someone's going to use that. Unfortunately, I can't believe I just said that because now it's going to be a freaking clip.
For sure.
But it's true. I come from big trucking. My family's from big trucking.
I agree.
And because of that, I feel a lot of empathy for any motor carrier and any driver that's out there busting their ass doing the right thing. And I know when I was at US Express that compliance and risk management ran the entire company. There were things that we would not do because that I thought, were okay because compliance and risk management would not take those risks. And I think that's true in most big trucking companies is they won't take those risks. But they're the ones that are going to have to pay the price because we've allowed people who don't have any money or resources to enter our industry. Plus, we've allowed an endless supply of truck drivers that are not qualified to enter our industry, and everyone's paying the crime.
I have a question for you. How do you bring integrity back to the game?
I think we got to be honest. Like, first of all, we got to be honest. We don't have a perpetual driver shortage. We never did. The market has found ways to reset. And when there was a shortage of drivers, look, there are periodic shortage of drivers. I want to be very clear. I'm not saying there's never a shortage of drivers. We saw it back in 2020, late 20 and 21, is there was clearly a shortage of drivers at that moment in time. But the market will fix those problems. Is when you run out of people to hire, then fleets end up doing sign-on bonuses and end up increasing driver pay and incentives to get them in, and they solve problems that really frustrate drivers. And things like truck parking. And there are ways through incentives that you can do those things that the market would correct. But what has happened over the last couple of years is you've had a bunch of new entrants, which are not compliant, that have just dumped into our industry and have caused everyone to sort of pay the price because the economics were so deteriorated. The profitability was so deteriorated by this endless supply of capacity brought by an endless supply of truck drivers, many of them not qualified, that motor carriers were not making any money. And when they're not making money, they can't increase pay for drivers. And that's a really unfortunate reality that we've been dealing with that hopefully this administration seems to, at least what we're seeing is that they seem to be focusing on it.
Now, you talked about the market. I want to shift to, a world I'm very familiar with, brokerage, right? Because when it comes to quote unquote, this is the worst possible market for brokers, low volumes with firming rates. Break this down for us exactly, Craig.
Well, look, this is a story I've been following for a couple of years. And I think even 2 years ago, we thought that there may be a brokerage washout, but it didn't come because the market was so sluggish. Market conditions were pretty stable, if you will. Not great, but for freight brokers, there wasn't a run on rate. Spot rates were low. Volumes were actually increased in 2024. And so it was actually a decent market for freight brokers. And so we saw volumes come back faster than spot rates, largely because of the fact that you had this continuation of capacity come in the market. This is different. We have very anemic volumes. Freight volumes are down 18%. Truckload freight volumes are down 18% year over year across the country. And so you don't have any volume really that brokers are benefiting from. And then spot rates are slowly melting up, just incrementally coming up. So it's not like they're surging to a point where shippers are sort of caught off guard. they're just slowly moving away going up a couple percent. That is where the brokerage margin lives and so a lot of these brokers when the market was collapsing and over the last couple of years have continued to sort of chase that rate down, lowering their rates that they charge shippers to attract as much volume as they could. And they won a lot of market share, frankly, at the behest of larger carriers.
Yeah.
But the problem is they've locked themselves into these lower rates.
These contracted rates too.
And so contracted rates are a great example.
Yeah.
And what they usually do is when the market heats up and rates go up is there's enough spot opportunities because you have these rips that are able to sort of make up for low margin. So maybe I'm making $50 a load, but I got this one load or these set of loads where I made $500 or $1,000.
Yeah.
I can make up for a lot of these really anemic loads. The problem is those spot opportunities are not available to them right now.
For sure.
So we're seeing sort of a melt up in spot rates very slowly, but also an anemic set of volume. And no shipper is really willing to walk away. So what's happening is brokers have a choice. They can either accept the margin losses and eat it, or they can give the freight back. Now, you and I both know if they give the freight back in this market, that the shipper is going to be like, peace, dog.
Yeah.
I'm out, and I will move my freight to an asset-based carrier.
For sure.
And that's what's happening is the brokers are in a really unfortunate position because if they eat the margins, then that really hurts their ability to operate and potentially puts their business at risk because their margins compress.
Yeah.
Or they give the freight away and they lose potentially some very large accounts. I mean, some of these big national shippers can be $5, $10, $30, $50 million to a broker. I know a broker here in Chattanooga where they have 2 accounts that represent $70 million in revenue.
Yeah.
2 accounts.
It's crazy.
I mean, combined. And these are 2 national accounts. And so the problem is a lot of these freight brokers live and die by that load activity.
Yeah.
And so when we're losing a combination of rate opportunity because there's no rips available to them and decreasing volumes, but increasing spot rates, that's the worst possible environment for freight brokers.
Absolutely. Now, follow-up question on that. You've been around brokerage your entire life. The entire junction of my life has been in brokerage for the majority of it. Now, talk to me if you're in that seat, right? You're making decisions and you're speaking with board members, you're speaking with shareholders. What is your posture right now?
I got to be on defense. And I think, look, everyone's known that this great freight recession was gonna end at some point.
Yeah.
And we're not out of the woods, but I do think conditions are improving for motor carriers. For sure. And at some point, we all knew it was bound to happen. And I think ultimately, as someone running a business, I think you're in an environment where you have to assume, like I look at my own businesses, and this is the unfortunate reality of being in media is when your customers are struggling, and think about advertising is always the most discretionary expense of all.
Yeah.
They're going to pull back on advertising dollars.
Yeah.
And so we know that there's a risk every single month that things could get worse just in the economy. And we know that if that happens, that we need to continue to take cost out of our business to get ahead of what could be worse. And I'm certainly thinking about that every day. I mean, going from an entrepreneur that sort of thinks about how do I grow a business to what do I do to make sure that I can just keep my head below and survive, it means that every single morning I wake up not to think about what do I add or what do I grow, but what cost can I take out of my business? And so I think as anybody in this climate, particularly if I ran a freight brokerage business or any type of business, I would be thinking about, okay, what cost can I eliminate? Yeah. And look, the biggest cost to any freight broker is people. So it's
overhead,
reality.
100%. But
you've seen C.H. Robinson, I think, eliminated 2,000 jobs. I mean, J.B. Hunt cut $100 million. Certainly humans in that, and that's an unfortunate thing. That you end up cutting people, and that's always unfortunate. But sometimes you have to do what it takes to survive. Yeah. And the businesses that don't do that won't be around. And so a sign of a healthy business in some ways is actually making those decisions. Everyone is in this together. If you're in freight, and I think the truck asset guys have been doing this for a long time because they've been struggling, but every business is actually making choices that they have to cut cost. And that's the only thing you can do in this environment. You can't control your revenue, but you can control your cost.
Yeah. Well into Q4, I want to talk specifically, this market and where we're at right now. Who is this impacting most? Brokers, carriers?
I think the brokers carriers are probably somewhat cheering. Yeah. Like, it depends on who you are. If you're hiring illegal drivers, you're screwed, man. I'm sorry, you got to play the game. The casino was open and the police showed up. And unfortunately, casinos closed, man. Somebody's going to jail. And that's what's happening is they were having it was a lot of fun, man.
For sure.
They could make a lot of money. And, and the problem is that those opportunities are being shut, and then rightfully so. And so ultimately, I think the carriers that did things from a compliance standpoint have the most to gain.
Yeah.
I actually think the large asset carriers are in a much better position than most, frankly, because they are able to afford a lot of the increases that will be coming with drivers. Right. They're much more tested in these sort of tight driver environments. Plus, I think shippers are taking a look at their routing guides and saying, I need to know that I can trust the counterparty. Yeah. Here's the risk right now for freight brokers.
Talk to me.
Is that Duffy has come out and said, not only is he going after the carriers that hire drivers that are non-compliant, but he's going to go after the shippers that load non-compliant drivers. Mm-hmm. That's a big problem for freight brokers because typically freight brokers they do a compliance on who the carrier is, but they don't typically want to know. And there's reasons they don't want to know, usually from a liability standpoint, anything about the truck driver. Now, some shippers demand that I need to know in some cases, some freight they do demand to know the driver, but in the vast majority of freight brokers, they just need to know who the trucking company is. Yeah. But now what the administration has said is, I'm going to hold shippers accountable for who they load and whom they load. And so that driver is non-compliant and gets caught, with a bill of lading that says Procter & Gamble, Walmart, or you name whatever shipper, then that becomes a problem for Walmart or P&G. And I'm not picking it. It's any name shipper. It doesn't matter. Definitely. And so all of a sudden, now these shippers are saying, I need to know that driver's qualified. I need to know that the guy that bumps my dock can speak English and meets the qualifications and is not committing these, is a fully compliant driver. And the problem with freight brokers is unless they take those steps, which will be expensive for them, like it will make it harder for them to book freight on marketplaces and load boards. It will make it harder for them to do the work to check for verifications of compliance. But they'll have to, and that will create more risk for them. But I think the asset carriers, the larger asset carriers, have the advantage because they can go to their shippers and say, look, we hire 100% of our drivers. We've done the background checks on the drivers. We've verified that they can speak the language. They have the advantages in this part of the market that frankly, the brokers don't have. And I think that is just another hit towards freight brokers. And to be clear, FreightWaves built its business by serving information. A lot of the people who consume our content are freight brokers. Yeah, 100%. A lot of people who consume our data are freight brokers. A lot of my friends are freight brokers. Same. And so, but it's we have to have an honest conversation about what's happening. And it means that if you know this is coming, and look, I think there's two paths. One is you can ignore it. And you can say, Craig's wrong again, because I've been wrong a few times. Oh,
but you've been right a time or two lately.
I love to be called out for those things. But Craig's wrong again. Yeah. And I think what will happen is they have the choice to either ignore it and say, hey, this doesn't apply to me. The administration's not serious. There's no way they can do this. And just ignore it and sort of pray that is the case. Or they can take it serious and find ways to get ahead of the problem before it is a problem. Yeah. And I think we've seen throughout the past couple of years, those companies that actually took the warning serious, even if they didn't believe it, but they took it serious enough to respond, are the businesses that survive. And we know so many stories of companies that just pretended or positioned themselves thinking that, this stuff was noise or wasn't real. I would rather, in my role in this industry, send out more warnings and be wrong than be on the other side and not give people the potential worst case scenario, because at least then if I'm wrong about the worst case scenarios, nothing's happened. But if you end up not being aware that this risk exists, and you end up getting caught because you weren't aware, then that's a much bigger problem.
Can I cuss on here real quick?
You can say whatever you want. This is not on cable. Okay. Actually, it's Sirius XM.
That was some very selfless shit you just said.
It's true.
That was very, I respect that, because you're like, hey, if I'm wrong, cool. But also, I'm going to prepare you guys for whatever is about to pop off.
I've been wrong. I've been wrong plenty of times.
That's real.
And I don't love being wrong.
Yeah, I get it.
I've been wrong plenty of times. But that's, that is the role that I have in the industry, is to talk about the things that could happen. Yeah. I hope that many of these things that we talk about, I hope that the brokers do figure it out, and we don't see a massive washout of freight brokers. A lot of people would lose their jobs. A lot of businesses would get caught off guard by it. But that's the reality that we have to have these conversations, because if we don't, and look, if you're running a freight brokerage, and you're like, well, this doesn't really apply to me.
Yeah.
Great, congratulations, that's awesome.
That's great.
But if you have risks in your business,
Yeah.
and you're sort of pretending that they don't exist, or hoping that I'm wrong and want to prove it, I hope that you're right, because then it means your business is not at risk.
Yeah.
But if I'm right and you have risks, then that creates an enormous amount of exposure.
Yeah, definitely. Now, talk to me, because you have to make a lot of decisions, right? In this company, but you speak for a lot of the actual industry. If you're Secretary Duffy right now, what moves are you making? Are you liking what you're seeing? I mean, I know you are, but like, is there anything he can pivot on? Like, what would you do if you're in Secretary Duffy's seat right here, right now?
I think Duffy is one of the most consequential DOT secretaries ever.
Yeah.
I think Duffy has done a couple of things. One is he's focused on the problems. He is willing to have an honest conversation. He is not caught up by special interests like the ATA, the truck driver. I mean, he came out last week and said there's no truck driver shortage. He basically, it was a reporter in the room that asked him about the fact that there's not enough drivers, and he came out and challenged it and said, in fact, I think the quote was he has different data than that guy did. Yeah. He's been respectful, but he was like, no, he pushed back on that. And I think that tells us that you have someone who's been studying the problems and is not listening to the special interests. And I think that's a really important thing. Look, everybody in the industry knows that the shippers are the only parties that can actually affect change. And while it's unfortunate that we have gotten to a place that we've gotten to where shippers have been able to absolve themselves of responsibility, and that freight brokers have played the game the way, frankly, I would have played it. No judgment on the game. I would have played the game the same way.
Absolutely.
But we're in a situation where this industry needs a massive correction. Yeah. It has a safety problem that needs to be dealt with, and it has basically a bottomless pit of capacity that's made the industry basically an economic backwater that needs to be addressed. And so these steps, it's possible that Duffy is in some ways overcorrecting, going so aggressive that you end up actually causing different issues. But I would rather have that than have the administration not focus on any of it. And I think that's what we've had, is they've been so asleep at the wheel at the DOT. I mean, Buttigieg was, if you ever listen to Pete, he rarely ever talked about the core issues in trucking. Yeah. Spent a lot of time talking about the airlines because that's sort of popular and people love, airlines, and we sort of, people experience it. But I don't remember many conversations. Now, he had a few, but many conversations. He certainly wasn't on TV talking about it on a regular basis. Yeah. Duffy's been doing that, and I think he deserves a lot of credit. And so
daily, if not weekly basis.
Well, he's daily. I mean, almost every day. Now, remember, he was a Fox News guy. I think the weekend on the weekend desk at Fox News. He's comfortable being on media. And I think we as an industry should be grateful that we have a DOT secretary that is very comfortable dealing with controversial topics, willing to go out and stick their neck out and talk about it on national TV, because we've never had so much attention focused on it. This is a moment in time for our industry to talk about the issues that, frankly, every other administration has ignored, because you have a DOT secretary that is paying attention to the problems, is listening to the people. A lot of his content, I'm convinced, comes from X and even FreightWaves. As we talk about stuff, it ends up in his talking points.
Definitely.
And look, it's interesting because we are, and I mean collectively, not just FreightWaves, not myself, but the folks on X that are bringing these issues up we have a voice that doesn't go through special interest and trade associations. The ATA is not filtering and speaking for the industry. In one group, the industry is speaking its own mind. I think that's a really remarkable thing. Yeah. And I think it's to be applauded. And look, there's going to be consequences to this. There's going to be companies that are going to have to figure out how to navigate a new environment. Freight brokers specifically have operated in an environment with very lax regulation. And they have in many ways benefited from an endless supply of capacity because anyone would be able to take the load at all costs. But you would have to be foolish to think that was going to continue forever.
No, definitely.
Like if you think that the largest asset-based carriers that are losing money, and clearly they are when you see their operating ratios above 100, we're going to tolerate an indefinite environment where they're just going to continue to lose money and not put pressure. And truck drivers who are going out of business, we're not going to bring up the problems in the industry and not put public pressure. And the rash of accidents that are caused through the lack of compliance was not going to, at some point, cause problems. You really haven't been paying attention.
Agree.
These accidents are massive. There are lives being lost. And I think it's very clear to me that the administration deeply cares about it. The other thing is it also touches on something the administration has made very clear. They believe, and I'm not here to argue the points, that there is a problem with immigration in the United States, like endless immigration problems. And they believe that's one of, if not the biggest problem in our society. Again, I'm not arguing their points. I'm saying that this is what they believe,
right.
That there's an endless supply of immigrants that have caused enormous amount of social problems, have caused an enormous amount of economic problems. People have lost jobs due to competition from labor, and they believe that that's the most and criminal problems. They believe that's the most pervasive problem we have in our society, and they want to fix it. And one of the ground truths, sort of epicenter of this, is the trucking industry, because it's a job that doesn't have a lot of, especially when you eliminate them, doesn't have a lot of barriers to entry. Yeah. It's a job that anyone can effectively do after some training, especially when you eliminate the rules 100%. And training. And so that is why our industry, it's also a job that if you're wanting to sort of stay off the radar, because there's been such lack enforcement, it's been easy to be a truck driver and not be a qualified immigrant, not have papers, not have work permits, and sort of stay under the radar because no one is going to enforce it. Yeah. And that's what's happened is our industry has become just a breeding ground for a lot of these problems. And what we get out of that is things like organized crime syndicates. We get freight cargo crime. Cargo theft
at an all-time high right now.
Is exponential. It's the fastest growing industry, at least in logistics, is all this crime that's taking place. Yeah. And it's a combination of lax enforcement, law enforcement resources being diverted, the crimes not being overly sexy. That's all caused it, but it's being propagated by eliminating the barriers to entry, where anyone could go start a trucking company. And because they can get labor, an endless supply of labor, it means that you have people who should not be in our industry. Yeah. And this is what we're facing with. And so the writing's been on the wall. And I think credit to the administration, credit to Duffy for focusing on this issue, because everything that we have as a problem in our industry has been caused by the lack of barriers to entry. We need to have proper screening on truck drivers. We need to have background checks on who our drivers are. We need to make it hard to register a motor carrier.
But that's like Bush League stuff.
It is, but this industry is Bush League.
That is that is the bare minimum.
And Malcolm, this industry is Bush League.
Absolutely.
It is a travesty what's happened. It is an absolute travesty. It's been a dumping ground for every problem in our industry. 20% of truck drivers have opioid addictions, according to the Trucking Alliance. 20% have opioid addictions.
So you mean to tell me a fifth of the drivers that are on the road right now?
One fifth, according to the Trucking Alliance. This is our families. I have 5 children.
Yeah.
Every single time my kids get in the car with anybody, and they drive down the interstate, they are putting themselves in a Mad Max environment where we don't know who's driving those trucks.
It's truly Russian roulette.
And that is the problem.
No.
That is an issue that must be dealt with. And it is caused by the lack of barriers to entry. And the motor carrier executives, the guys that run the biggest, they get a lot of heat on X, because anytime I mention the mega carrier, man, it is a lightning bolt of opinion.
Firestorm.
But they care deeply about the industry. They care about the drivers. And I know drivers don't believe that. Yeah. The reality is that a lot of the problems that we have seen is the fact that these were perhaps the decisions made, the congressional decisions made, the policy decisions made were well intended, but we got the outcome of those decisions basically turned out to create an environment where you have a much deterioration on safety, deterioration in economics, and the only way to stop it is to put much stringent rules in place.
I agree. Now, let me ask, because you've been everywhere this week, meaning on all platforms, right? You recently pivoted to LinkedIn.
Well, I didn't pivot. I started FreightWaves.
That's what I saw you say. That's what I saw you say.
I've been absent for 4 years.
What? Well, why?
I decided to focus my attention on X.
Yeah.
And I have a low opinion of LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I think it's a cesspool, but as X is a more cesspool, but at least it's a little bit more vibrant. I just don't like LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And the problem is now it's AI, a lot of it's AI slop. But I decided to get back on there. And I threw up a video. I follow the stats, but I think I've had something like 250,000 impressions in the last 4 days on LinkedIn. So now I like, everyone's like, you got to get back on there. I got to get back on there. And I had a lot of people sent me text messages like, oh my God, I saw you on LinkedIn. Like, I can't believe you're back on there. And it was like a surprise because I've been so resistant to doing anything on LinkedIn. But it is a platform that our industry, and it's interesting because now these issues are very important to me.
Yeah.
Particularly in trucking. And I feel like because so many people are on LinkedIn and not on X, I had a CEO of a very large broker who mentioned that a lot of they will let brokers in their business be on LinkedIn, but they won't let them be on other social media platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And so
this is true.
One of the things that's been important to me is to have these conversations. And I think in some ways by ignoring LinkedIn, I've ignored a large portion of the industry, because I haven't had my voice out there.
Yeah.
And it's not about me. It's as much about the stories that resonate with people that are in our industry should hear it about. They should understand why these things are taking place. And because I'm an observer of sorts, but I've also been a participant. And I've seen the good and the bad of the biggest carriers. I mean, US Express was flawed. I mean, business my dad built, every business is flawed, including FreightWaves, and we have our own flaws.
Of course.
Every business has flaws, but US Express has flaws or had flaws. And I have a perspective. A lot of the big motor carrier executives will not come out in public because my dad's generation was always of the view that talking to media or doing interviews, and I think this is still pretty pervasive in the trucking industry, nothing good comes from that. Bringing attention as a motor carrier just means that you're going to be, nothing is going to come of it. Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of the executives have not come out in public on a lot of these issues, because they feel like they need to work through the channels.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, because I've got multiple text messages and comments to it, is they're so happy that we're bringing a light to these topics. And we have the opportunity to use a large platform. And it's resonating with the audience. And you can see by the engagement levels of what it's resonating.
Absolutely. So last question, man. What is your challenge, I'd say, to your last point, your peers that are in this space, whether it's carrier facing, whether it's brokerage facing, and they're making those decisions? What are you, not only this week, but for the foreseeable future, and this being a pivotal time in our space, what's your biggest advice that you want them to walk away with?
Well, look, I think they have businesses to run, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the reason we're a media company.
Yeah.
We're a set of personalities. I can say anything because as a media, my business model is driving engagement. That's what media companies do. At the end of the day, it's all engagement. Yeah. But we have the opportunity to highlight these issues that we care about and should be cared about. And so the consequences of me coming out in public are not great. They're not big, right? If I come out and say something that offends somebody, great. It drives engagement. I'm not trying to be provocative for being provocative's sake, but the penalties for me are very different than if you're a CEO of a Fortune 1000 trucking company. You don't want that kind of attention, so you kind of have to sort of play it. But I think we have to have honest conversations with it. And I think those executives, it depends on where you're at. I think if you're a large asset motor carrier, I think I would be positioning myself to realize that rates are probably going up. And it means I also need to make sure my house is clean. Yeah. And I need to make sure that, whether we're talking our independent contractors, whether we're talking our shared power operations, our power only operations, whether we're talking the truck drivers that we hire, the owner-operators and the independent contractors we hire, I want to make sure that's clean.
Definitely.
And you have a window here to do it. Like, unless you believe that the administration is going to stop caring, or that they're not serious, or they're not going to use every resource they have to attack these problems.
Yeah.
If you believe that this is just another, bureaucrat that is just saying stuff and doesn't mean it, and I'm talking specifically Duffy, if you believe that's the case, then you're exposing yourself to a lot of risk. There's this whole concept in venture world about what we call asymmetric risk, which is the idea that if I invest in a company, let's say I put $100,000 in a company, and that company goes to zero, I can only lose $100,000.
Yes.
But if I take that $100,000 investment, and because there is no cap on how big a business can be, that $100,000 investment might be worth millions of dollars or even billions of dollars over time. That's an asymmetric bet. The downside is 100,000, the upside is exponential. That's the reason VCs are willing to throw these big checks at companies. In the world of compliance, is the asymmetric bet is all to the downside.
For sure.
Is if I am not compliant and I sort of disregard the rules, I think maybe the Supreme Court's going to come save me, or the DOT does not have the resources to enforce it, or the state Department of Transportation isn't going to force it, my shippers are not going to care, then I'm now taking an asymmetric risk that the benefits of not being compliant are such that they outweigh the risks. And I would say that is a foolish proposition. And the reason I think it's foolish is that if you've been paying attention to any of the things that the administration has been focused on, they went to Congress under the big, beautiful bill and got $30 billion of funding for immigration enforcement. The Department of Homeland Security and ICE got $30 billion. To put that in perspective, if that was a military, it would be one of the top 10 militaries in the world. $30 billion.
That is insane.
U.S. Coast Guard doubled its budget, which is a different story in terms of enforcement. But this administration, for even when they've come out and things like tariffs and have reversed it, the taco trade, if you will, of what it's called, even when they've done out the tariff stuff and sort of reverse course, they have yet, as far as I can tell, ever, and not just this administration, but the one that they ran before under Trump, ever really reverse course on their view of immigration and crackdowns and enforcement. And so now there have been some attempts, like the border wall was sort of defunded and stuff, but as it relates to immigration enforcement, they believe it. And right now, trucking is in the epicenter of immigration enforcement. And the more accidents we have, the first thing the media is going to ask, particularly the conservative media, was that person a registered truck driver? What was the training? What was the background? Do they have documentation to work? And so these questions are going to get asked. And there's 5,000 fatalities a year that happen in trucking. 5,000.
That is insane.
You are 20 times more likely to die on the highway than you are to die in a commercial airline. Like it's so much more exponential. It's such a much bigger risk. And so I know between now and next week, there's going to be a fatal accident that involves a truck. Statistically, there is.
Statistically,
right?
yeah.
I mean, 10 a day fatalities related to trucking.
Yeah.
And because I know that, chances are, even if you just take the BLS data, that at least two of those, 19%, at least two of those accidents will involve an immigrant. At least two.
Yeah.
Now, whether they're registered or not registered, we don't know. But statistically, again, I'm arguing stats, is chances are that we will continue to have accidents that involve, even if they're just as safe, which I'm not going to get into right now. There's a lot of data on this that says it. But even if they're just as safe, statistically going to be accidents, and those are going to be blown up by the media. And that's going to empower the administration to say that they're right, because they want the wins. They're getting so much negative pressure on immigration that it's too aggressive, that they want the wins. They want to be able to demonstrate to the public that they're doing things to increase safety. And if I know that, and I know the playbook I know the playbook and I understand that, then you can believe that the administration is not going to back off this issue. Yeah. And if you know that, and you have parts of your operation that are non-compliant, then you should prepare for finding ways to get in compliance before it becomes a problem.
Real data, real talk with a real one. Craig Fuller, thank you, brother.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Malcolm.
I appreciate you. And coming up, of course, this week is going to be a jam-packed episode that we're going to have. Y'all, road ahead is going to be so massive that we got to finish it up and tighten it up. So make sure you guys are always in tune with me, your host, Malcolm Harris, on What the Truck. We have much more coming up for you this week. Stay tuned. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.